Fantastic. It says it's preparing. I don't know whether I'm live yet or not, so I won't start talking until I get a definite. You're live? Yep, now it seems we're live on Facebook. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this week, where we're joined with Rachael Roberts, who I'll be introducing in just one second. Great that so many people are able to join us on a Thursday morning for these webinars, and there's been some great chat happening in the chat in our previous webinars. If you are watching later, if you want to add a little comment with a hashtag catch-up, just to give us an idea of how many people access the webinars afterwards as well. And then also we can kind of say hi to you later too. Obviously, if you're watching now, you're watching, and that's great. And if you're watching us on catch up, you know where to find the videos. But just a quick reminder that all of the webinars are saved in the media videos section, which you can find at the top of the page. So the kind of the response to the advert about this session has been incredibly positive. So it seems like this is very much a topic which lots of people would like some advice on. Do you manage your time, or does it manage you? So as I say, we're joined this morning by Rachael Roberts, and Rachel's had an extensive career in ELT, starting out, as many of us do, in teaching, and she had her own blog, which is still around, ELT Resourceful, which has loads of great resources, loads of great articles, and lots of great teaching ideas. She's also worked as a teacher trainer and has published resources. So she wrote the CELTA Teaching Compendium, which was an excellent resource to support both new teachers and teacher trainers as well. And she's also been involved in the ELT Teacher to Writer publications. So we'll find a link to add to the chat a bit later for those as well. And now she's focused very much more on her work as a life, career and business coach for people in the ELT industry, and having that experience of working in those different areas in ELT makes her best placed to help others deal with their problems or issues as well. So she has a company, Life Resourceful, which again has lots of great articles, lots of great support. And you can find her on Facebook. She has a Facebook group called Lightbulb Moments, which is another place to kind of interact with other ELT professionals. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Rachael. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, I mean, I've been in ELT a rather frighteningly long time, more years than I care to remember, really, doing a variety of things, teaching, training, managing, materials writing. So as T mentioned, I run a Facebook group for ELT professionals who want to manage stress and gain balance. And when people join that group, one of the questions that I ask them is kind of what their biggest struggle is. And I would say that at least 50% of the time, the answer is time management. So it doesn't hugely surprise me that you know, there was an enthusiastic response to this, because clearly that's something that a lot of us are dealing with. Now, I think, you know, one of the first things that I often do with clients who sort of bring time management to me as an issue is try to help them work out whether it's a question of they actually have too many things to do, which is often a result of, you know, kind of wanting to please people, finding it difficult to say no, that kind of thing, or whether it's about actually how they're managing their time, and that they actually do have enough time, but that they're not managing it that successfully. So quick straw poll, perhaps put in the comments, which of those do you think is true for you? Or maybe it's a bit of both. Now, the comments, I know, I'm looking at the comments on my phone here, and I know that they're coming up kind of a bit more slowly than I can see them. So I'll just kind of leave you commenting there and carry on, and then I'll come back and look. So for a lot of people, it is likely to be a bit of both. But if you're not sure, and you think that it might be how you manage your time, it could be that you're spending a lot of time in what I would call sort of like firefighting mode. So you're always dealing with last minute things. Things seem to sort of pop up all over the place, like that game whack-a-mole, you know, that you're kind of hitting things down and more things pop up. And, you know, your to-do list feels never ending. And at the end of the day, you're exhausted, but you still feel that you haven't got very much done. And this is certainly, you know, I can relate to this some of the time myself. I'm just looking at the comments now. Yeah, so not managing time properly, mostly saying no. Yeah, so it can be either. It can also be a combination of both. But apart from the obvious impact on your stress levels, if you're in this kind of firefighting mode, one of the problems is that you don't even have time to think about how you're spending your time. So, you know, you're head down, burrowing away, and you're not necessarily taking the time to step back and think about how you could be saying no to some things or how you could be prioritizing your time better. So, first of all, well done in actually setting aside the time to come to this session and or watching it on replay, because, you know, this is definitely the best thing that you could be doing in terms of stepping back. So the first thing that I would suggest, apart from coming to this session, is to do some kind of audit of your time. So if you do a lot of desk work, like I do, you know, if you're writing, for example, or even spending quite a lot of time on, you know, admin or lesson planning, you could try using an app like Toggl, T-O-G-G-L. There are other similar apps, but Toggle's the one I use, and I find it very easy to use. So Toggl, basically, you write in what you're doing, and then it keeps track of the time for you. And if you stop using the keyboard or the mouse or what have you, it knows that, and after 5 minutes, it will ask you if you're still working on the task. So if you get into the habit of just putting that on and changing it every time you change task, after about a week, you've got a really good idea of how you're spending your time. Now, obviously, observing what you do can change what you do. So it might actually make you more efficient if you've got Toggl on. But it's useful, I think, nonetheless, to be able to look back and see where all that time is going. And, you know, when I get clients to do this, nearly always there are some surprises there about how they're spending their time. So, yes, I've realised I haven't been moving the slides. I've been so busy talking to you all. So there you go, there's 4 slides quickly. So I don't know how good you are at budgeting your money, but I'm willing to bet that at the very least, you make sure that you are able to pay your rent or mortgage, that you have money to spend on food before you go and, you know, splurge on a designer outfit or something. Right, so you understand that you have limited money to spend each month and that you need to make decisions about how and where to spend it. But very, very few of us actually realise that the same thing goes for our money, for our time. And so we splurge our time on things. You know, it's the equivalent of kind of buying loads of scratch cards and then not having enough food in the cupboard. You know, you're all ELT teachers, so I'm going to sidetrack and nerd out a bit here. This is actually from a book that I've worked on, Navigate B2, and this is language. I think this is really interesting because if you look, the collocations between time and money are, you know, virtually all of them you can use for both. And this is because actually time and money are very, very similar. You can waste both of them, you can fritter away both of them, you can invest both of them, save both of them. Right? So it's really worth, you know, thinking about your time in the same way that you think about money and making conscious decisions about where and how you spend it. Now, I'm not saying that you're not allowed to fritter away any time, right? You know, that can be fun, same as it is fun to fritter away money, but it's about kind of getting the, you know, the basics in your cupboard first. So are there any insights from that about how you're spending your time? Is there any way that you're immediately thinking, goodness, yes, I'm spending, too much time on this and not enough time on other things? If there's any insights like that, you can just pop them into the chat box. I'm just looking at the comments now. Petra says, I find the idea of toggle a bit scary because it will catch me out. Well, nobody else has to see it. You can keep it secret. But it is really useful, because I think once you really are faced with, like, how much time you spend scrolling on social media, for example, then you can make, like a conscious decision about it. Jack says, next week I'll be on top of everything. I'll get a head start this weekend every week. Well, I mean, it may be, Jack, that you simply do have too much on. And again, this is why I think doing an audit can tell you that. So that would be the first place I'd start, because once you're aware of how you're spending your time, then you can really start to budget it, as I talked about. So another way of looking at this is the Eisenhower matrix. Right now, I don't know if you've come across this before. It comes from, it's been around for quite a long time. It comes from a book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Successful People. But apparently it was originally President Dwight D. Eisenhower who came up with it. So the idea here is it's about prioritizing. So the theory is that everything that you do can fit into one of these 4 categories. So, you've got things which are urgent and important, so they have clear deadlines and there are consequences if you don't do them. Things which are important but not urgent. So, those things that they may not have a deadline, but they are important in bringing you closer to your goals. Things which are urgent but not important. Right, so that might be, things like, I don't know, replying to an email, for example. You need to do it urgently, but it's not necessarily hugely important. And then there are the things which are not important and not urgent. And obviously those are the distractions and time wasters. Now, you could also put fun things in that category. So I'm not saying that you should never do anything that's in that 4th category at all, because obviously that's important. But there are some key points here. And perhaps the first one is that most of us don't spend anything like enough time in box 2, in the important but not urgent box. So this is a mistake, because if you don't focus on things when they're not urgent, eventually they tend to move into the urgent and important box. And that's when you get overloaded. So if you tend to procrastinate, which we'll talk about a bit later as well, then very often that is because you are not spending enough time in box 2 and everything's going into box 1. Also, things like exercise, for example, right? That doesn't have a deadline, but it's certainly important. So we can decide that we're too busy to do that. Eventually, even that will become urgent, because we'll get to a point, where we have to start looking after ourselves better, because our health forces us to do it. So consciously setting aside time for box 2, I think is really key. And then box 3, so the urgent but not important, I think is the other box that really needs looking at, because anything that's in this box is ripe for either ditching or delegating. If it's urgent but not important, then you need to think, well, is it really urgent? Does it really need to be done? And is it me that needs to do it? A lot of the time, again, we spend too much time in this box because these things feel like easy wins. So, we spend 2 hours dealing with lots and lots of little tasks that seem urgent. And then we never get round to those big tasks that we really need to do. So any insights from this? I'll just have a look at the comments again, see if anything's coming through.
Yeah, quite a few people have seen something similar. There's a couple of interesting comments. Karen mentioned how so much can depend as well on the time of the year. Simon added, energy levels can at the beginning of the year, you can be so full of enthusiasm to get on with things, whereas perhaps this time of year, the second term started, but we're all feeling a bit wintry.
Mm-hmm.
Have a huge effect.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think, one of the things, we are going to go on to talk about this, but it is interesting, not just the season or the time of the week, but also the time of the day, varies a lot as well, I think, in terms of the energy that we have. So thinking about these sorry, go on, T.
No, I was going to say as well, with you mentioning about exercise, that was one of the things that we talked about. We do these progress hangouts every fortnight. In our last one last Tuesday, a lot of people said, yeah, I need to make this a priority. I need to set aside time to make it part of my routine as well.
I think, particularly when you have control over your own time to quite a degree, which I think, a lot of us do, even if you're not self-employed, as a teacher, you do have control over quite a lot of your time. And I think often we are like kind of the worst bosses we've ever had to ourselves. If somebody was actually telling us, like, oh, you've got to work all of these hours and you mustn't exercise, and we'd be outraged, but we're perfectly happy to say it to ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, definitely that's worth considering. So, I mentioned here that for a lot of people, the problem can be not being able to say no. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about, saying no to your boss when they ask you to teach a class or something. But I think teachers generally do have this tendency to kind of, A, be very interested in what they're doing and kind of get excited about things and therefore take on too much, or B, not want to let people down, want to be helpful, and both of those things together can lead to kind of overwhelm because we've just got too many things on. And one thing which I find quite helpful to consider is when you're saying yes to something extra, you need to consider, okay, what am I therefore saying no to? So if I agree to do this, fine, but that then means that I won't have time to spend time with my family, or I won't have time to exercise, or I won't have time to, cook a decent meal. And make that decision consciously rather than saying yes and then kind of working out that you haven't got time for those other things that are important. And I think that can help us as well if we kind of feel guilty about saying no, to recognize that, the impact of us saying yes to everything is often not just on us, it's also on those around us. So that would be my point about saying no. Also, I think sometimes, in fact, a third reason I think for saying no can be that we are very sort of like competent people, and that we feel, oh, well, I can do this and I know I'm going to do a good job of it. And so we kind of take on everything from that perspective. I mean, I spoke to a school owner recently who was basically doing everything, like wearing about 6 different hats, and then wondering why they didn't have time to do any marketing. Nobody, however competent you are, and probably you are very competent because it kind of goes with the territory of being a teacher, can do everything. So once you've recognized, though, that this is a pattern for you, it is absolutely possible to change it. So I think the first step is kind of recognizing the pattern. The second step is working out, okay, why am I finding it difficult to say no? And then the third step is to train yourself to step back and think before you agree to anything. I mean, I make it a policy these days that I never kind of agree to anything immediately. I always ask for a little bit of time to think about it so that I can be sure that it is actually something that, I can fit in and that the price isn't too hard. So I'll have a little look at the comments and see if there's anything coming up here about that. Oh, gosh,
interesting comments about being a yes person, and as well how people spend their times, and going back as well to when people are most productive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, well, we're coming up to that, definitely. Yeah, Esme's saying I was always a yes person. I'm good at thinking no, but find it difficult to say it. Yeah, no, I can relate to that one, actually. You have that immediate kind of reaction of like, oh God, no, but your mouth just opens and out comes yes. Again, I think if you can get into that habit of asking for a bit of time, then that allows you to sort of marshal your defenses, or to screw your courage up to say no. So okay, I do actually have, if you find this tricky, I do actually have a free guide, some more tips to saying no. So the link is there. At the end, I'll give you a link where you can find all of these things as well. So if you haven't got time to write that down now, that's not a problem. So why time management isn't enough, right? So time management is important, obviously, and it will help a lot, but it's not just about managing your time. And some of you, I think, have already started talking about this in the comments. There are two other important things that you need to manage as well. Any ideas what they are? I'm just seeing if there's anything coming from the comments. That might take a little while. Okay, I'm going to tell you anyway. So they are energy and focus. So it's not just about managing your time, it's also about managing, budgeting, if you like, your energy and focus. So I'm going to take you through a kind of energy audit, if you like, now. You can, write about this in the comments box if you like, or you can just make some notes for yourself. Right, so first of all, okay, fuel. So by fuel, I'm talking for us as humans about food. So, how aware are you of the impact of what you are eating and drinking on your energy levels? Many of us, I think, are sort of, use food as a way of kind of giving ourselves energy, which is fine, that's what it's for. But is it giving you sustained energy? Or is it leading then to a crash where you have to kind of then pick yourself up again with caffeine? Are you drinking enough water? How much is enough water? So opinions vary about this, but it's probably a lot more than you actually are drinking. I would say I can see tea having some water. Yeah, so I do keep a glass of water on my desk and try to kind of regularly sip. And actually something which I learned recently, which I didn't realise, is apparently it is much better to be sipping regularly than it is to kind of be downing a whole glass. Whenever you realise you're thirsty, you absorb it much better in smaller amounts. So that's a useful tip, I think. Caffeine. Now, I mean, I do drink coffee myself, but I do now try to kind of restrict it to just a cup in the morning, because it has a half-life of about 6 or 7 hours. So it can affect sleep if you're having coffee too late in the day. But the thing that really kind of opened my eyes about coffee, actually, a while back, I learned that I always thought that coffee kind of stopped you being tired. And I learned that it doesn't at all. It's like painkillers in that it blocks the receptors that make you feel tired. So, this might seem just like a technical thing, but from a mindset point of view, it made me realize that I am still just as tired. I'm just not aware of it. So coffee doesn't solve the problem at all. It doesn't stop your body actually being tired. It just means that you don't actually realize how tired you are. So having too much coffee means that you are constantly blocking what your body is trying to tell you about what it needs. So fuel, sleep and rest. Right now, different people need different amounts of sleep. I think that is true. I personally need at least 8 hours or I can't function very well. But I do know that, some people get by just fine on 7 or even a bit less. But are you sleeping enough for you? Are you waking up feeling rested? or are you waking up, feeling exhausted and needing 2 cups of coffee to get yourself going? And it isn't just about sleep as well. It's also about rest. Are you, resting enough? By which I mean, just doing nothing, or meditating, or even napping. I'm a big fan of naps. They can really help, I think, to refresh the brain. I would recommend that you only nap for like 20 minutes though, because any more than that, you're likely to go into a deep sleep, and then when you wake up, you're going to feel groggy. So what you really want is to kind of just be on the edge of sleep almost, but not going in too deep. But that can be really refreshing. So according to Cal Newport, who has written a book called Deep Work, the brain can only focus in a deep kind of way for up to about 4 hours a day. Now that's quite a thought, isn't it? Because most of us are working a lot more than 4 hours a day. But he's not actually saying that you should only work 4 hours a day. He's saying that you can only work in a deep, focused, concentrated way for 4 hours a day. So that means those things that are in those top 2 boxes, perhaps, of the Eisenhower matrix, those are the kinds of things that we can be doing in that 4 hours. And the rest of the time we can be, dealing with the email or whatever, and also getting some breaks and some rest so that we can continue. Right, let me just pause there. I'm just having a look at the water tip. Yeah, you use a 2-litre bottle and pour from it. I'm imagining you're saying, Lisa. Yeah, absolutely, great tip.
Yeah, a couple of people mentioned drinking less now in the socially distanced classroom because of wearing masks and things.
Yes.
So having something that kind of tracks your water consumption as well is a good idea.
Yeah, very good point actually, T. You can get sort of apps and things, or I mean, I've got a water bottle which I used to kind of, when I was actually going anywhere instead of just being at home, I would take it with me, and it has like it's not the whole day's consumption. You're supposed to fill it up halfway through, but it tracks on the side of the bottle how much you've had. So
yeah,
I think that can be very useful. Simon says, I'm trying to plan rest into my day, which I think is a really good idea, to actually schedule it, because otherwise it doesn't tend to happen. I very often, I mean, mine varies because I have kind of like different appointments each day, but it's usually for me like sort of early afternoon, and I go and do like a 25-minute yoga nidra nap, which is like a sort of meditation / nap. And that, yeah, it really does kind of make the rest of the day so much easier because I'm not fighting being tired.
Excellent.
Karma says, I have no problem with timetabling. That's good for you. Right, and the third sort of energy audit, movement. So how much are you moving? Now, if you're teaching in a classroom, you are going to be moving at least a bit. But if you are sitting at a desk teaching online, that's very different. And I imagine that probably quite a few of you are spending at least some of your time now teaching online where you were moving before. So this is not just about exercise. I mean, exercise is obviously important, but it is simply about moving frequently. So too much sitting has been shown to actually shrink the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain to do with memory. So it has quite dire physical effects if you are just sitting for hours at a time. So I have an Apple Watch which actually tells me like every hour it makes me move, and I find that really helpful. But I would suggest something similar, even if it's just standing and kind of going for a quick walk around the room, anything like that will just kind of keep things going. Otherwise your body sort of goes into stasis, which is really bad for it, basically. So these are all things that you can do to sort of improve the amount of energy you have. But as I mentioned, this book, I'd recommend this book actually. It's really very useful. So Cal Newport, as I said, says that we only have about 4 hours of focused time. So we really need to think, and again, some of you have mentioned this, you really need to think that when are you going to use this time? How are you going to use this time? I was just looking at, I just got distracted by a comment about we don't move in the classroom anymore. No, I mean, you won't be moving about from place to place, but I imagine you might be standing rather than sitting, which is still movement of a sort. It's still much better than sitting at your desk. But yes, you probably would have been moving more prior to COVID. Yeah, Danielle, I've just seen, says yoga nidra can be great to energize. It's often associated with going to bed, but a 20-minute one in the day works wonders. Yeah, absolutely. This is what I find. I do it sometimes at night as well, but it's during the day that it does the best thing for me. So for many of us, I mean, you may not have entire choice about this depending on your timetables, but for many of us, the time of day when we have the most energy is in the morning. And certainly for me, you know, because I work from my desk, writing and coaching and so on. And I find it's really tempting to start the day by kind of going through emails and dealing with little tasks like that. And I have managed to get myself out of that habit now, which is much better, because what happens is that you use up all of your kind of prime time, your prime energy on those little sort of bitty tasks that aren't deep work and that don't need that energy. And then by the time you get to, right now I've got something chunky to do, you haven't got the energy anymore. So really think about, you know, when your prime time is, and wherever possible, try to schedule in like your deep work for that time, you know, whether that's lesson planning or even teaching, you know, try to focus it if you can where you've got the most energy. And you can manipulate that a little bit through things like naps, because if you have a nap, that can then give you another kind of another bite at the cherry, if you like, of doing some deep work. So it's certainly not about being lazy having naps. It's about kind of using your time intentionally. So it's, yeah, I mean, the other thing about sort of scheduling hard tasks first thing in the morning, of course, is that it does also avoid procrastination, which is another thing that some people can struggle with. Well, some people, most of us, I think, can struggle with. Have you come across the expression "eat the frog"? It's not a very pleasant expression, really, but it comes from a quote by Mark Twain, who apparently said, if it is your job to eat a frog, you had better do it first thing in the morning. And if it is your job to eat 2 frogs, you had better eat the bigger one first. So, you know, essentially what he's saying, of course, is if you have something that you really don't want to do, that is the thing that you should do first. Rather than putting it off to the end of the day when you're more tired, you haven't got the energy, and you're quite likely to say that you'll leave it for the next day. And then that happens again and again. So the other side then of managing the energy and focus, so one is about kind of being intentional about what we do and when we do it. The other side is avoiding the distractions. Now, in terms of dealing with external distractions, the solutions are fairly straightforward, I think. You know, we just need to decide what steps we need to take so that we don't get constantly interrupted. So, you know, different things work for different people. Some people, it might work to get up earlier so that everyone else is asleep, and particularly if you're also trying to homeschool. Some people, it works to put a sign on the door saying "do not disturb." This is one that I use. Or find a better spot to work in the house, you know, so if you're working in the kitchen and people keep coming in and out to make snacks or something, then maybe you'll be better off in the bedroom, you know, find somewhere that will work. You could try working with headphones. You could try ambient noise. This is something I do occasionally if there are, you know, people in my family nearby. So I use an app called I don't know how to pronounce this. Coffivity, is it? coffee. It's like coffee and then itty on the end. And it provides like the background noise of a cafe, which I actually find, you know, very kind of good for productivity. Just seeing if there's something coming up here. Cleaning the bathroom for me, presumably, Chris, that's your procrastination technique. Yeah, and Danny says it's been tough working from home and homeschool. Yeah, really tough. I mean, I've got 2 kids who are doing GCSEs and A levels, which is a nightmare, but at least they are old enough to work on their own. You know, so I'm quite grateful for that. I think it's harder still if you've got, you know, primary age kids, frankly. Okay, so think about sort of how you can manage external distractions, and then also think about what external distractions you're actually manufacturing for yourself. So if you have notifications turned on and pinging in all the time, for example, you know, if you're already feeling stressed, that sound of like an email whooshing in or a ping is likely to trigger a release of adrenaline and kind of make you feel even more stressed. And over the day, that adrenaline will build up, so that you will end, you know, you'll end the day feeling completely wired. So the higher the levels of adrenaline and cortisol in your brain, the more your kind of fight-flight reflex takes control. And when your sort of fight-flight amygdala part of the brain is more in control, your prefrontal cortex, which is your sort of logical, short-term memory kind of part of the brain, it actually sort of switches off, or at least turns the dial down, because basically you don't need that part of your brain when you're dealing with a threat, is what your brain considers. So, you know, it can really affect how well you work if you're feeling that stressed. So a certain amount of adrenaline is not bad, because it kind of gets you going. But if you have too much, then it definitely will impact. You know, so it might save your life having too much adrenaline, but it's not going to help you write a good lesson plan. These kinds of notifications, sometimes people actually kind of quite like them, because you can get a burst, as well as adrenaline, or instead of adrenaline, you can get a burst of dopamine, which is like a reward. So, you know, if you're enjoying being on social media, it can also be impacting your brain, but in a way that doesn't feel as negative. However, what happens is you can become sort of addicted, if you like, to those hits of dopamine, and your brain is trained then to stop whatever you're doing to go and check, like, who's commented on Facebook or whatever. And of course, every time you stop and switch tasks, there's a price to pay. As well as that little surge of, you know, stress or drive chemicals, the brain takes time to switch focus. So this might only be a few seconds, but if you add up an entire day's worth of flipping between tasks, that's a lot of productive brain time. And, you know, David Mayer, who's a psychologist who's studied this sort of switch cost, he estimates that we might be wasting as much as 40% of the time that we spend working, which is horrifying if that's the case. So, you know, this is why multitasking is basically a myth. Some people are much better at switching, and I think that's why some people feel they're better at multitasking. Some people are obviously much worse at that switching. However, everybody has to kind of pay that price if they're switching from one task to another. Okay, let me just have another little look at the comments and see if anything's coming up. Yeah, so Simon's saying what could work 2 hours, then 30 minutes off, then another 2 hours on. Yeah, I think it will be different for different people, Simon, kind of like what your optimum time of working is. So again, this is something that you can track and sort of see what works for you. Katrina says, I turned all my notifications off, including the little flashing light. It was driving me crazy. Well, it's intended to drive you crazy. It's specifically designed to kind of get you on alert, to get you to look at things, you know, and to keep you engaged. So, all right, then of course we've started talking about this, but you know, there's the tech distractions. So I don't think personally that we have to kind of throw away our phones or even delete all of our apps, you know, unless you're really terribly badly addicted. It's just about becoming more conscious or mindful of how we use them. You know, so definitely, as we've said, turn off all notifications. I also personally, because I use social media a lot for my business, but I use it as intentionally as I can. So I will go on there in the morning, you know, maybe for 20 minutes, then I'll have another look at lunchtime, and then maybe another look at the end of the day. I'm not kind of going backwards and forwards all of the time. And, you know, try and notice in a mindful kind of way when you get that urge to go and check your email. One thing I think that can really help with developing that mindfulness actually is some kind of app that literally stops you from going and checking. This is one that I've used. This is called Forest. You can put it on your desktop or your phone, and you program it with a list of banned sites, you know, so those are sites that you choose to ban, like Facebook, for example. And if you try and visit one of those sites during the 25 minutes, then it tells you to go back to work. And if you ignore it, then the tree, which gradually grows over the 25 minutes, will die. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but actually I find that I can't bring myself to make this tree die. So it's quite effective, I think, in terms of stopping us, but also it does make you aware of how many times you just automatically go and, you know, check your email or check Facebook or whatever is an issue for you. So you can choose what you block. And because it only blocks those specific sites, it doesn't stop you from working. It doesn't stop you from, you know, doing anything else that you want to on the internet. It can also be used, I think, very effectively in conjunction with, like, sort of, you know, blocking out larger periods of time. So 25 minutes might seem familiar to some of you. Somebody has mentioned this already in the chat, the Pomodoro technique. So if you, I won't assume that everybody has heard of this. I'll just kind of give you a quick overview. So this is something that I use quite a lot. I've also taught it to my teenage kids, and they use it as well, and they love using it. So I recommend introducing it to your students too. So the idea is that you work for a 25-minute slot at a time. So it's called the Pomodoro technique because of the kind of tomato timer like this. So you work for 25 minutes straight, and during those 25 minutes you are not allowed to go and make a cup of tea or check your email or do anything else other than work. But it's only 25 minutes, which kind of feels doable at one go. Then you get a 5-minute break. And you should actually take a break, like not then sort of go and check your emails and things, but actually get up and move around. And then you do it again. And the idea is that you do 4 what's called Pomodoros, 4 25-minute slots, and then you can take a longer break. And, you know, 25 minutes does not seem very much, and you might feel, oh, you're not going to get anything done. But it is amazing, actually, when you know that you're just focused for 25 minutes, how much you can get done in that time. And I find that I don't do this all of the time, but if I have a task that I'm struggling to get down to a bit, like marking, for example, would be one that I think works very well with this. Or, you know, anything, if I have to write something that I'm not particularly engaged by, then it kind of really helps me to focus. And my teenagers like it because actually they spend less time studying when they're using it, because they used to spend hours, you know, kind of faffing about and not getting down to things, whereas in fact they get through the work much faster this way, and then they can have a break. So, you know, what about though if you have found that you've tried these kinds of things before and that they just don't stick. The chances are, I would say, that then you have to dig a bit deeper and ask yourself, like, what are the distractions doing for you? What's the attraction of the distractions? God, that's like, I should have that as a blog post title. You know, it might be that you're feeling anxious about how well you're able to do the work, and the distractions are a way of avoiding that anxiety. It might be that you're feeling resentful about the work. You know, maybe you feel you're not getting paid enough, or, you know, whatever else is going on. It's nearly always, if you have like any kind of bad habit, and certainly, you know, being sort of constantly distracted is a bad habit, it's nearly always about something that you are avoiding, and that you don't want to look at. So, you know, many of us spend most of our time almost on automatic pilot, and we can find ourselves unconsciously creating or giving in to distractions. And the solution is always to become more mindful. And I know, you know, this is something that you know, Simon is very into. In fact, he has a mindfulness and EFL group. But the more that we practice mindfulness, the better the connections are in our brain between the prefrontal cortex and the sort of fight, flight amygdala. So, you know, it physically changes the shape of your brain. And it also helps you, I think, to understand, you know, why you might be behaving in certain ways, and to kind of quieten down that part of your brain that is perhaps anxious and therefore looking to the distractions. You know, if you're interested in finding out more about mindfulness, I do have a free ebook, which is on my site, liferesourceful.com, which has like 30 different mindfulness techniques that you can try. So, you know, feel free to come and download that. And also, as T mentioned at the beginning, I do have a Facebook group where we look at this kind of thing. We look at different areas of managing stress, having a more balanced kind of life, and generally, you know, those things which help ELT professionals to kind of have a happier life, if you like. So please feel free to come and join that too. So we've got a little bit of time, I think, now. And so any kind of comments or questions, I'll have a look here as well. But T, I don't know if you saw.
Yeah, there was an interesting comment from Dan when we were thinking about kind of urgent and with deadlines and things like that. And he was saying perhaps it's a feature of our profession, you know, because we're always lesson planning. That's always something that's got to be done. And kind of whether that stops us from being able to look ahead and plan more for the future, because we're always focused on that day's lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, but I think that's probably also true of kind of most jobs, actually. You know, there are always those things which repeatedly have to be done, I would say. And it is about also, you know, I mean, it's easy to say, but setting aside some time at least every week where you can do that planning ahead. So for me, you know, the things that I'm always doing, obviously any writing project that I'm on is going on. I'm doing a weekly live, I'm doing a weekly blog post, but I do set aside time on a Friday to actually do forward planning. And I think that's kind of the only way to do it, really, is to set that time aside.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Sorry, Nicole. I saw another comment here actually that I thought was interesting. And Fiona says, part of my issue with taking breaks is that I think it'll just make the day longer or the work won't get done. I think obviously that could be the case, you know, if you're constantly going out, you know, for an hour-long walk or, you know, to whatever. But a lot of the time, that isn't necessarily the case, because you're likely to be more efficient when you've had a break. And in fact, there was some research that was done into sort of efficiency, like time and motion studies. And they found that the people who took more breaks actually did get more done. You know, so I'm sure you've all had that experience. I know I have, where it kind of feels like you're wading through treacle. you know, and at that point I've learned now that there is no point in carrying on, and I will then go and have a 20-minute nap, because after that I will get so much more done.
Yeah. Power of naps.
Yes, well, you know, if you have that opportunity, I mean, if you're working in an office, it's quite hard, you know, because you can't very easily go and have a nap, although I have been known to go and sit in my car on occasion to kind of get that nap in. But, you know, certainly if you're working from home, you may well have that opportunity, so take it. It'll make you more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of comments coming up about the block planning as well. One thing that I was quite impressed with when Chris did his webinar, it was really obvious that he was already looking ahead. When he was planning one unit, he was already looking ahead at what other vocabulary, what structures were going to be coming up, and kind of pre-teaching them, incorporating them into earlier units. I was like, wow, how do you find the time to do that? But like you say, a lot of it is time management and making time for future planning.
Yeah, it's all about prioritizing, I think, you know, and sometimes when you talk about prioritizing and productivity, and people interpret that as kind of how you can work harder, and it really isn't about that, you know, because it's about, if you're having time off, have time off, you know, and enjoy it and get something out of it, rather than constantly kind of half working, half having time off, you know, which it just ends up taking much longer and being less fun.
Yep. There's an interesting comment here as well from Lisa, who's newer to teaching, and she says that obviously at the moment lesson planning is taking a long time, so it would be great if anyone's got any tips that we can help Lisa to kind of speed up that process. It is definitely something that once you get into the routine and your lessons, you kind of get to know the structure, and it does become a lot more automatic.
I think, I mean, you know, I'm sure that there are lots of tips from the experienced teachers in this group, but I think it is inevitable personally that when you're a new teacher, it's going to take you a bit longer, because it's a new skill, and learning any new skill, you know, you're slower at it to begin with. But I do also think that it is, I certainly was like this, that you can kind of, you know, make perfection the enemy of good. And be kind of wanting to make it absolutely perfect, and to be totally sure that you've got enough material, which usually means you've got about twice as much as you need, you know. So one tip I would say is to have a few kind of activities up your sleeve that you can slot in, that, you know, that you can use with different vocabulary or whatever, and try and consciously underplan a bit, because usually people plan far too much, I think, when they're new teachers, because of that fear of blanks.
Another tip I often give trainees on the Cert TESOL is like, always try to have a communicative activity at the end, or like some questions in mind, because it's the sort of thing that if you've only got 5 minutes, you can ask one question, whereas if you've got 10 minutes, you know, you can develop the discussions a lot more. Obviously more about adults than younger learners, but still there are ways that we can be a bit flexible.
Yeah, well, and with young learners, you can have, you know, like little routines, and you can just go back and do the same thing again, because they like doing that, you know, the thing that you did last week, you can reprise it, you know. So I think if you've got like a little store of, these are the kinds of things I can do if I run out of material, then that stops you panicking so much.
Yep. But there was also quite an interesting couple of comments around when you were talking about movement and being online, and people are saying, you know, it still feels like language schools are very much working with the old model. You know, here in Spain, lessons tend to run maybe from 3:30 till 9:30 at night. In the past they did, and you know, you had your 1 hour lesson, maybe you had a 55-minute lesson and a 5-minute break. And so lots of schools are still trying to keep that same model with the online and with the hybrid class, hoping we'll get back to the old normal sooner rather than later. Obviously, that's putting a lot of pressure on the teachers to be online for that amount of time, and the students as well.
No, it is difficult. I mean, one thing, you know, you could potentially try is actually teaching online standing up. And I have to say, I keep thinking that I'm going to do this, and then I do. I mean, I do have a sit-stand desk, and I do stand up for calls and things quite often, but I haven't actually done it for like giving a webinar or anything like that. But it's certainly an option. And if you don't need a sit-stand desk, you can put the laptop on top of the stack of books or something.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that might well help, or at least a bit of variety. So I'm just looking to see if there are any other. Oh, I did see one. Somebody here was talking about, which I really like. I'm looking back for who it was. Oh, Katrina. Yeah. So she says, I like doing something for 5 minutes or even 1 minute. If there's something I don't want to do, I tell myself I'll just do it for 5 minutes. And once I've done 5 minutes, it's easier to keep going. I think that's a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading about actually a Japanese technique of doing something for 1 minute at the same time every day. And that's another way of building up a routine, whether it was a minute of stretching or a minute of learning another language. And like you say, it sounds like a ridiculous amount of time, but if you schedule that in and do it at the same time every day, once you're into it, you kind of go, oh yeah, I'll keep this up.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good tip, because often we do the opposite. We come up with sort of like this new habit that we want to do, and then we set ourselves ridiculously high standards and then fail and then kind of go, oh well, I may as well give up then. And I think it's a bit of a setup, really, because we do resist change. The brain doesn't like change. It's spent all that time building up these neural pathways. Like, why would you want to change it now? So I think totally that's a really great way to do it. And what you were just saying about starting with 1 minute, because then it becomes normal for the brain to do that at that time, and then you can add to it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I mean, there's still lots of comments coming in. We're getting close to the end of our hour now. So, I mean, I'd just like to say huge thank you to Rachael. I was making notes all the way through. There are so many good ideas. I think especially around the energy, making sure we are eating food which is sustaining us well. I know I'm guilty of kind of the chocolate covered nuts, and I think, oh, I'll just have a quick snack, but actually that doesn't really help, although it does give a dopamine shot.
Well, at least you've got the nuts in there. Nuts are good. That's protein. But it is that sort of, I struggled with this for years. I would get busy and think that because I was busy, I didn't have time to kind of prepare healthy food or exercise, and it's totally the opposite. Like the busier you are, the more you have to kind of make sure that you're, it's like being an athlete. If you're going to run a marathon, you would make sure, that you were eating well, that you were sleeping well, that, and it's exactly the same thing.
Yep. There was in the SIG tweet meet on Twitter on Tuesday, they were talking about, mental health and self-care whilst you're on Zoom a lot. And a couple of people were commenting there about planning in that time for a lunch to kind of like take 20 minutes to make something, a bowl of soup or a bowl of pasta or whatever it is, and then taking time to sit away from the desk to eat it, because being online and working from home, it is very easy to just say, oh, I'll just grab a sandwich and I'll check social media whilst I'm having it, because social media is my downtime, but you need that time away from the screen as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. You need that sort of rest, literally.
Excellent. Well, yep, huge thanks. I think everybody, the chat's just been exploding with so many messages of things that people are going to try, and great tips that you've shared this morning. And so, yeah, thank you very much, Rachael. And we'll be sharing the links to the Facebook group and the Life Resourceful page as well, so you can get those resources which Rachael has mentioned.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you ever so much then. And thank you all for watching and commenting and participating. It's been great, and hope to see you over in my Facebook group.
Fantastic. Yep. Well, have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.